You see, the story itself has a certain kind of logic, right? So there's the history and there's the story, there's the mythology, but there's also the inception point. And of course, things become embellished, and over time, especially in oral traditions, some things become diluted, some things become enhanced. There's a melding, there's a mistelling. But that's also all part of the dynamic nature of, you could call it, the realm of Platonic forms. Or you could call it the intrinsic dynamic nature of number. Dynamic. Like that it's a strange thing to talk about, but the dynamism is intrinsic to number, which is to say, movement is intrinsic to geometry. We think of static geometries that move in a certain way, rather than dynamic geometries. Anyway, the story, the importance of the story, the logic of the story. You know, for instance, Michael Jordan. Everybody knows Michael Jordan. Everybody knows Wayne Gretzky. I don't know anything about basketball or hockey, but I know that pretty much Michael Jordan and Wayne Gretzky are the best. They say Wayne Gretzky is like so statistically so much, he's way outside a probabilistic curve. Like he's the best of the best of the best by the numbers. So even if there weren't video, even if there weren't TV, even if there weren't the leftover reels of tape, even if there weren't essentially the visual historical documents and the what we could consider the historical or legal written documents of the stats. Even without that, among a certain demographic, he would still have been legendary. If he had lived 2,000 years ago, he would have developed into some kind of mythological godlike status. Yet it had an inception point. Similarly, in mythology. That's why, for instance, because a lot of people say the Bible's a story, right? If it if it's only a story, it was written by some like obsessed, basically John the Baptist figure, some sort of outcast, some sort of like, say for instance, the New Testament was envisioned, that Jesus was envisioned. Let's say someone knew all the old stories really well and wrote a new story. Let's say that if Jesus wasn't, that Jesus was created by some kind of J.K. Rowling figure. But let's imagine it even worse, like a total piece of crap who is an awesome writer, right? We can think of a few of those historically, like these awesome writers who are kind of pieces of crap, or certainly didn't in life represent what their book jacket, cover, author photo represents, right? Because the publishing house has an agenda injecting content into a world in a way that the world finds acceptable. And there are a lot of social mores or social mores that we have to either acquiesce to or give respect to or overcome in order to inject elevated content into the mix. The story itself has a certain kind of logic. So even if all of the Jesus stuff was just a creation, it would have had to have come from somewhere because it so perfectly speaks to the symbolism that came before. That what we know and that what we are still learning about. But it hits everything. And it doesn't, the story of Jesus doesn't just answer Israel, Judah, Semitic, but it answers Egyptian prophecy and story. All story, even if it doesn't explicitly prophesize, all story implicitly prophesizes. As it so happens, the Egyptian story does explicitly prophesize, but it's not an easy thing at first to parse through. But that it answers that. It answers a lot of the, for instance, in Greece, Temple of Isis. Well, where did that come from? Where did that adoration of Isis or Iset come from? And Iset does make more sense. It came after. Jesus satisfied Egyptian prophecy. A lot of what Greece admired came from Egypt. So when Jesus satisfied, basically at Jesus' birth, Egypt died. It had already died like pretty much 1,000 years before that, but like full-fledged, unequivocally. And then 300 years later, to my mind, people don't necessarily draw this line that I draw, but to my mind, essentially what is called Neoplatonists, even though I believe that is a horrific misnomer. But what people call the Neoplatonists, that's, to my mind, where Greek philosophy as we know it died. The Greek tradition. Beginning with Heraclitus of Rhodes, who also didn't live in Greece, well, actually I don't know what original language he wrote in, but if he spoke Greek, that wasn't the only thing he spoke. It's just interesting that Greek philosophy is born and then dies in more or less the greater Turkish Syrian region. It's kind of interesting. But anyway, the logic of the story that Mary is concerned with is pretty simple. Mom. One of the things people don't talk about in this whole like patriarchal worship thing, right? Like, it's interesting. So here are all these dudes, right? That's the way a lot of us maybe commonly think of it. It's like a bunch of dudes talking about God the Father. It's a bunch of dudes talking about God the Father, right? Yet all these dudes have a father, but they're kind of like portraying, acting out in a very real way. Like, I don't mean to diminish it at all, because it's a profound meditation, life meditation, sacrifice, self-sacrifice. It's a amazing, incomprehensible way of living and way of worship that only doing it could ever. You could only wrap your mind around it, having done it, and maybe not even then. But anyway, from the outside, a lot of times it looks like a lot of dudes talking about God the Father. All dudes who have a father. And one, it's funny to think, but like, our moms are so important, and we so love our mom. Not every single person, but collectively, on average, which is why it hasn't affected the culture in such a way. But like, and like I said, I recognize there are exceptions, but overall, nobody worships anything more than their own mother. In your heart, even if you hate your mom, like, you hate her with such a passion that, like, she's always on your mind, right? So, like, in that sense, you love her or worship her above all else. Nothing can either make or ruin your day like your mother. And, well, of course, for married folk, then that, in a sense, kind of becomes the same thing with a wife, but that's heavily influenced by the mother. The pre-influence of the mother. And it's not all just something we can break down. So yes, you can create these quote-unquote psychological arguments, but there's also something very real about it. And where it doesn't work, there's something very appropriated about it. But anyway, imagine if it were God the Mother. Right? And a lot of people want more motherliness, and it depends what we mean by that greatly, because Mary is a specific kind of mother. Mary's a loving mother. Mary's not a crazy mother. Crazy mothers do a lot of damage, and they have been necessary because of the viciousness of the world that precedes them. So I'm not denigrating vicious motherhood. Because when we say, like, are we tapped into our feminine side, I like what we normally mean by that. Like, I really like. But we also don't necessarily recognize the horrific ferocity of that side in protection of the child, right? Which is good, fantastic, it's great, it's perfect, until it goes too far, and then it wreaks havoc in the world. But the perfection of the story is that we reach for the mother. And I only recently realized this, and it kind of shook my whole worldview. That because one of the hot zones in the world is the Mideast, certainly for the last 20, 30 years, but even though lately or more recently, a lot of the public attention has been shifted toward Russia, China, North Korea. Um, Now we're kind of dropping the Mideast, at least in the public conversation, even though, quote unquote, strategically, it's still very important. Important. There's a lot going on, but I didn't realize this until like I don't know a few weeks ago that Muhammad claimed to be of essentially a descendant of Ishmael. So that's one of the reasons why it's called Abrahamic religions, which is one of the reasons why we shouldn't call it Judeo-Christian. We should call it Abrahamic, including Islam. And I also didn't realize until recently the role, or at least a description of the role of Jesus in Islam, nor did I understand the role of Mary. And I didn't realize how much Mary was revered in Islam. Mother. And that even in Islam, Mary experienced or performed or that Jesus was a virgin birth. But going back to Abraham, because of course Jesus' lineage going back through David to Abraham, through supposedly Isaac. But then in Islam, it goes back to Abraham through Ishmael. But we also know that, the Canaanites, the Phoenicians, the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, the Ishmaelites, who are also attributed as being many, like a lot of times when the Jews were fighting different tribes, a lot of those were tribes that came from Ishmael. And it says it in like one little blurb, and that's one of those places in the Bible where it's like so and so begot so and so and so and so begot so and so. So like you're going through like 5 pages of this shit, and it's just like name after name after name, and you're like, ugh, whatever. And then there's like one little blurb saying like, yeah, and these tribes are from Ishmael. As it so happens, it's some of the enemies that the Jews are fighting back then and today. But what's it all go back to? And that's what's super important about today and about mothers. It's what's important about abortion, for that matter. Like, George Carlin totally got it right about, like, about how every life matters, how every, conception matters, but, So, pro-life is like, before you're born, like, we got your back, and after you're born, fuck you. Like, you don't realize what you're doing to essentially like raped or coerced teenagers if you make abortion illegal, because you are sentencing young girls to death. And there will still be abortion, it'll just be illegal. Like, do you really want to make a change in the world? And I guess all I'm saying is, like, if you're going to be pro-life, you have to be pro-mother. You have to stop thinking about it from your cushy place in the fucking world. And think about it from a place where someone who can't even support themselves finds themselves in a situation where, like, they know that both themselves and their child is going to die. They know it. That it's going to be really, really, really bad. The solution isn't making laws to make abortion illegal. The solution is to throw fucking money at moms. Period. The solution is to throw money at mothers. And the solution is to get rid of, like, really making children first. It sounds like so hokey pokey and it sounds so like, but like philosophically. And that's where Plato's Republic gets it fucking wrong. That's why Plato's Republic is not a book of philosophy. Plato's Republic is a test. If you follow along and agree at the end, you fail. Plato kills David. Plato kills Ruth. Plato definitely kills John the Baptist. There are some people who are so useless to society as we know society and are born for just one thing. And they appear so strange. It comes up all the time. If Jesus came to your church, you wouldn't even let him in. Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. Depends how white the robes were. But definitely, if John the Baptist came to your church, you'd kick him to the fucking curb quick. You know? So... in the Abrahamic religions, the problem that's happening today has to do between Ishmael and Isaac. Of course, there's the Christian, what we call Jewish split. There's that, even though that's still an Isaac outbirth. They're both from Isaac, while from Muhammad, Ishmael. So, if we look at the Judeo-Christian philosophy of basically the underdog story of that, which is the most appealing part, Islam has a claim. Because we didn't put the child first, and we didn't raise Hagar to the level that we raised Sarah. We basically, in a certain sense, it's like, what was the great thing now in Islam? The great thing Abraham did was that he didn't kill Ishmael. In Christianity and Judaism, it's because he didn't kill Isaac. That's my understanding. And in both instances, it's because God told him to do it, and then God told him not to. That's the whole big thing. Oh, Abraham had so much faith because he was going to kill his son. Yet people were killing their sons all the time, especially in royalty. The patriarchal coup was always protected against. Any possibility of patriarchal coup was always protected against. So, even in civilized life, the killing of sons was predominant. Or at least not unheard of, you know. That's one of the places where the mythology gets it wrong, and it gets it wrong because the people who tell stories aren't necessarily the people who make them. Yet, the truth is still there. It was a different God. A God. Not God. Not the God of gods. A God told Abraham to kill either Ishmael or Isaac. A God told Abram to kill his son. The God of gods rejoiced when Abram chose to say no. That is when the covenant was made. That is when free will chose the God of gods. And you think that's nuts, but like people used to go to a Colosseum, Rome. Oh, we herald Rome, where the real republic was born. What we call Plato's Republic was really meant better translated as the state. But anyway, I'm getting off on too many sidetracks. I gotta wrap this up. I don't have much time, a few minutes. But in Rome, which had fantastic plumbing. I mean, the plumbing is phenomenal. Yet, people would fill stadiums to watch, lions eat Christians or gladiatorial fights. That's what people did for fun. Sponsored by the state. With all this beautiful architecture surrounding them. You're in the Colosseum. Oh, the great art of the past and the great architecture of the past. Here we are today studying the Grand Colosseum. We're starving to death lions. One of these guys in these togas are like, hey, ye great thinkers of all time. Hey, all y'all great thinkers of all time, ye Republican Democrats, ye warmongers. Let's feed peoples to the cats. Okay, yep, second that motion. Yays? Yay! Nays? Maybe not, I don't know, that doesn't seem like a good idea. I think that might be a bad thing to do. The yays have it! Things are better than that now. As bad as they are, they're a hell of a lot better than that now. But the whole thing with like Islam and then Judaism and Christianity and the Middle East and all these different things is like it all comes down to Ishmael and Isaac, and it all comes down to Hagar and Sarah, and it all comes down to that we don't worship motherhood. Never mind worshiping the feminine. Never mind worshiping the masculine. There is something to worship on earth among people, to work for. Throw money at mothers. Make every mother, every girl who could be a mother, feel safe, feel protected. To know that everyone in their community is behind them, no matter what they did, no matter how it happened. We're gonna fucking throw money. See, that's the thing. You wanna make the laws instead of throwing money at moms. Throw money at moms. Fuck the fucking laws. The laws ain't gonna change shit because on the black market and the underground of darkness, there's no bottom to the underground of darkness. There's no bottom to the underground of darkness. And there's no depth toward which courage reaches in desperation, even when it's making the wrong choice. Because when you make that split moment decision between death and death, what do? Throw money at mothers. The reason we haven't is why the world is fucked. Money for moms.